conversational.
Yeah, he was really cool. My dad liked him a lot. He was like,
So what was it like in the U.S.?
That's
the worst thing I like. Yeah. Yes. That's wild.
All right, so hello everybody. Hi, so I'm Ross. I'm from the Independent Labor Club of New York City. We are an independent civil social organization of workers from around the country. We organize panels like this, where we try to investigate the current working conditions in various industries and whatnot. Sometimes we talk about political events of the day. But often we're just organizing social gatherings, like we do bowling nights, we do bad movie nights around the city. We're going to do a game night. Our inaugural game night is going to be a couple weeks from now at Hex House. We're hoping to do another one at Wonderville at some point in May. But yeah, if you're interested in the Independent Labor Club, please talk to any one of the people who've been hanging around back or at the front. Who's involved with the ILC. But yeah, I'd like to, at this point, hand it over to Alexander King, and he will take it over from here.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ross, and everybody from ILC for helping organize this event. So thankful to see everybody here. Thanks for coming out. I think many of us feel that there's something has gone wrong in games the past couple of I guess not just the past couple of years, but especially in light of all the waves of layoffs that we're seeing for several years in a row, and that even successful launches of games now are end in layoffs for many people, and to say nothing of people who don't end up on credits of games, or their game never comes out at all, and sort of lost to history. And that what's left, I know a lot of us feel is sort of increasingly the domain not of games, but of gaming. That studios are taking not just inspiration, but the literal implementation of techniques perfected in casinos, and we're less interested in that type of work. And so, someone who cares very deeply about games as an art form, I certainly feel that there has to be something better than this, a better way for things to be run, and there is. Hooray! And one of the ways to move forward that is through organizing labor, and that having more control over the work that we do. It's at the forefront of the games industry right now, and so we wanted to have a conversation with people who are at are observing different parts of that in different ways. So we've got a great panel here tonight. So I thought the first thing we could do is just introduce ourselves real quick. My name is Alexander King, and I'm just moderating. And I work in games. I freelance, but my labor organizing is primarily through the educational work that I do. I'm in the adjuncts faculty union here at NYU, local 7902, where I'm the staff data analyst, which is I like maintain our membership database and things like that. You work in games, you learn a lot about spreadsheets, and then turns out. Spreadsheets have uses beyond games. Is one of the things that I've learned. And so that's the work that I do. Maybe we can just go down the line and have everybody introduce themselves real quick.
Yeah, I'm Nathan Grayson. I'm with an independent worker-owned video game publication called Aftermath. And I also wrote a book about Twitch a while ago, but actually I gave a talk on it in this room. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sherveen. I am the local treasurer. I'm on the executive board for United Video Game Workers. So we're the direct join union for game workers in North America, US and Canada. And we also have a student membership tier. So if you're a student, I will also happy to chat to folks. I'm also a freelance game developer. I work on like a number of different projects. Like, I guess, I don't know, what's most recent? Like, I worked on a project called Take Us North, if anyone's heard of that. And I'll throw it to you, JD.
Cool. Hi, everybody. I'm JD. I'm an MFA of the Game Center, so happy to be back. I am an assistant professor in game design and development here in New York, and I'm here representing sort of a similar position as Alexander. I'm the vice president of our faculty union, and so happy to sort of talk on what union leadership looks like and why that matters.
Hi, nice to be up here with everybody. I'm Lore. I am a member of the Tabletop Workers United. Thanks, appreciate it. We are a young and scrappy union that of board game stores and cafes across the city. We are with Workers United, the folks responsible for a lot of beautiful and wonderful organizing campaigns, in particular the Starbucks campaign. We're Local 64, and I am involved in a number of ways. I did the social media when we were really big on that. And I'm also a member of. I work at the Uncommons in particular. I'm a member of our unit council. So lots of fun things. Thanks.
Yeah, do we applause break? Yeah. I'm Goran. I'm a software developer for the New York Times Games team. I'm also one of the founders of our tech union. I was the VP. I was on the bargaining committee, and now we have our contract, so now I'm a shop steward. So we are still the largest tech union with bargaining rights in the country. Hopefully that does not last, and like someone beats us. I would love that. So here to answer any and all questions.
Awesome. Yeah, round of applause for our speakers. Today. So yeah, I think one of the exciting things is having folks from a bunch of different manifestations of organizing in the games industry, and but I wanted to focus on some of your personal experiences and how you how did you come to get involved in this? And Nathan, we'll circle back to, since you're a special case here, but for our other four guests, how did you come to get involved in this yourself? What's been kind of your personal journey to labor organizing?
Yeah, I think for me, a little bit of a special case. I've been relatively aware of a lot of games organizing since about 2017. I don't know how many folks are familiar with Game Workers Unite, but a lot of those initial discussions were happening at USC initially. So a lot of folks at USC kind of were at GDC in 2017 discussing a lot of those things, and just being around a lot of the students who were talking about that. I was also very aware of it. At the time I was on a student visa. I wasn't really in a position where I was comfortable being public about union organizing. But for about, last year, I think, being very aware of a lot of the layoffs that have been happening and the ways it was also making my own work a lot more complicated, I was at the point where I was very, very excited about getting into union organizing. But as a freelancer, it was very difficult for me to participate a lot of the time. If you're not embedded at a particular studio, it's very difficult to be as involved. But so Code CWA, which is kind of the larger movement for Communication Workers of America, that's been organizing various studios. I think they have 5,000-ish workers now unionized. They announced United Video Game Workers not last GDC, but the 2025 GDC. And I was at GDC during that time, and I got involved then. And basically, the past year we were going through kind of getting our committee spun up, getting all of the initial elections underway, electing our first executive board. And so that's kind of been my path into organizing. And then this year, this is our first year really going out and doing initiatives with our full elected executive board this year.
Sure. For me, I was forced to be. But the jokes aside, both my parents were lawyers growing up, and so like union organizing and that sort of stuff has always been around my family. My dad was in politics. But when I joined LIU specifically, like a condition of joining as a full-time faculty member was to join the faculty union. And I was like, okay, sounds good. And then sort of I got more and more involved as I saw less and less people kind of using the lever of the union as a method by which we could try to make changes happen. And then ultimately just kind of kept going from there. So yeah, that's really my story.
Awesome. And with the case of Tabletop Workers United, I feel like myself and a lot of other people for the last several years, for much of this decade, for the better part of maybe this century, whatever, we've been feeling the squeeze. We've been feeling the way that the world functions, the way that capital demands certain things of us. Just the squeeze, like resources dwindling, prices going up, rent getting more and more expensive, wages stagnating, even as the state and the city do what they can to raise the minimum wage slowly and over time. Things were tough. And particularly, with a lot of the folks who are working at the stores that, the stores in Tabletop Workers United are service workers, they're childcare workers because we do that as well. And, don't always get treated with the amount of respect that they deserve as most workers do. And so it started with the Hex & Co stores. The largest body in our union is those 3 stores, which are a chain. And there was this domino effect of, if they're going to do it, we're going to do it because we're stronger as one. But all of us, I think, that whole time had been feeling, this is not okay. And we have no means, really, of recourse, Of course, the boss can say all day long that their door is open, but that doesn't often have any real-world implications beyond just being a platitude. And we felt that. And so Hex & Co unionized. We unionized a month later. This was the fall of 2023. And then the Brooklyn Strategist as well followed. And it was a really interesting experience to be part of that, to feel all of a sudden like, most of my life I've, been protesting, I've been involved in mutual aid, I've been, I guess voting and other things. And of course, which is important. And thank you all. And I feel like it was just it was a very different form of being able to be involved, to do things, to make choices, to be responsible for something that felt a little bit out of control, a little bit confusing, a little bit overwhelming, in a beautiful way and in a really empowering way. And so I was very much like, I don't know how much of this I can take on, and that became taking on a whole lot of it, especially as the demands of unionizing, what it asks of us, and what it benefits from us being willing to give, took shape. And so early on, I was a steward. I was not on the unit council at first until I think halfway through the bargaining process, and I was on the bargaining team as well until we won our contract last summer. So we're almost coming up on a year. Pretty exciting, which I think went very well. Yeah, I guess that's about it for me. It's been a fun, long road, and hopefully a road that continues to wind in interesting ways.
Laura, did I read when you were first organizing that you brought a bunch of demands to management, and their reply was, if you have this many complaints, you should just unionize?
Yeah. So I guess self-fulfilling prophecy. At Hexing, yeah, right. You know what? Actually, yeah, you're right. But so the structure of Hex & Co., they have, I think, 4 or 5 managers, and the 2 co-owners who variously also own the other businesses involved in the kind of broader family. And, the Hex & Co. was taking demands after demands after demands to the managers, hoping they would relay them to the owners of the store, who are kind of phantasmal sometimes, hard to get a hold of them. And one of the managers, was just like, I don't know if you're really this frustrated, in kind of a in a throwaway manner. And people took that seriously and came right to Workers United, and they were, I guess it was like like an emergency organizing, the emergency workers, like the organizing committee, EWOC, thank you, that we worked with Workers United, and they just immediately helped us make sense of what was a really wait, this is different, this is, what are we, should we be doing this, is this the wisest thing to do? And it was, so, yeah, it was interesting. It was that they did say that, it's true.
Boss is the best organizer, right? Yeah, so I mean, in terms of my thinking about unions, I went to school for computer science, not really a profession that has been known to be unionized, unless you work in government. So it sort of never crossed my mind. My parents are, one of the rare former communist country immigrants who are still communists. So obviously I was sympathetic towards the whole endeavor, but didn't really know anything about labor law, that you could form a union that's not already existing, et cetera, et cetera. So when I joined the Times, they obviously had a union for the journalists that they've had for over 80 years. So there was a union presence. They would do tabling where you could get copies of the contract and things like that. But obviously made it clear that I am not part of that union. The union didn't, the management definitely did. And then the international edition published a pretty homophobic cartoon that a bunch of us got upset about, which led me to a caucus that was forming in the union for queer people, that I was like, oh, it'd be great if I could join. And they're like, anyone can join. And I was like, I kind of wish we had a union. And they're like, well, there's a very angry lesbian who works with you who would also agree with you. And they put me in touch with her, and so we started talking to peers and sort of espousing the benefits of a union. And we thought it would be kind of hard, and it was. But software development sort of has the libertarian streak to it a little bit of you're your own coder by yourself, et cetera, et cetera. But once you start talking about the realities of being in a workplace, for me, it was shortly after I joined, one of my team members was just gone one day and unceremoniously fired for, no reason given to us or anything like that. And talk to anyone, they have a story like that. They have a story of, vacation being denied for ridiculous reasons, different accommodations being denied, tons of stuff that doesn't have to do with, whatever you would might think of a typical, who should be in a union type person. And you find those commonalities when you're talking to people and say hey, wouldn't it be easier if we all addressed them together? And you have, 600 of those conversations once a month with everyone for a while. And then they all vote yes to join the union. And then, the law took us from there, right? We were forced into an election, no voluntary recognition for us. And then we went through a contract campaign. We went on strike. I like to say I've done every step, every way that management could have made it more complicated for us, they did. And so we got to experience the full range. And now we file grievances, and we win some of them, which is great. We get extra money for people, extra time. We've gotten some people rehired. And now that things are not as rosy for software developers in the world, we have extra severance for layoffs due to AI. So that was sort of a like, oh, do we really need this in the contract when we were negotiating the contract? And it's like, oh, it's so nice that we have this in the contract. So it's never the best time for a union is when, when it's nice and sunny outside and you don't have to worry about oncoming layoffs. So it's definitely an important thing for everyone in the video game industry, in my opinion.
And Nathan, you've got a long history of covering labor issues in games, and I was curious kind of what the origin was that for you, because Aftermath, I mean, it's one of the few like worker-owned outlets, but it's also, I think, one of the only, I don't know if this is true, but it's the only one I know of that is in a top bar nav has labor as a like a category.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
I was just curious kind of like how that came to be.
Let's see. For me personally, it just sort of, because prior to working at Aftermath, I worked at the Washington Post, and then before that, Kotaku. And I think it just sort of, kind of came about naturally as a byproduct of just doing news in the video game industry. It's always been fraught. Before, this rash of layoffs, there was a lot of crunch at various major studios. So, when games were nearing completion or sometimes not even, there's basically like mandatory overtime. A lot of issues that would cause people to down the line have health problems, burnout, all of that. And so it just sort of made sense to cover things from that angle. I think especially because, I like games as much as anyone, and I enjoy playing them and all of that. But I think that the most interesting thing to cover in games is the people who make them and the people who play them and all of that. And so to me, I was just like, yeah, of course I'm going to write about, people who make games. And as I was doing that, it just, you hear all these stories about, oh yeah, this part of game development really sucked. This was really hard. There was crunch here. And now, now that more and more studios, or now that workers at more and more studios are organizing, I mean, again, it just makes sense to cover. I think that, it is conspicuous when like sites and publications don't cover this stuff because it's one of the biggest things happening right now in video games. I mean, especially like you look at, Microsoft, for example, and like how many studios over there are unionizing. I mean, that stands to change the way that all of this happens, which is good because unlike Hollywood, which, has a like Hollywood is pretty unionized. Games don't really have that. And so workers have comparatively very little power, especially in America. Like even if you look at, actually it's really funny to look at the ways that like layoffs happen at studios in different countries, because like I think it was Sony who posted their like procedure, and so in America it's just like, yeah, your job's gone, no notice. And then in Japan it's like you have a long period of notice, like you get to bargain, all of this stuff. In Britain it's also a little better, but yeah, in America it's just like, nah, bye. And that's messed up. So hopefully things will start to change as more and more studios unionize.
On that topic of I guess how it's impacting your working conditions for everybody. Since I think across the board we tend to work in mostly on smaller games. We don't have someone really representing the like sort of AAA space in part because of like fear of reprisal of appearing on a panel like this is like something that was expressed to us. That it's like the larger companies are the main case to unionize, of course, but are also more difficult because of the concentration of power that they have. But one of the things that a few of you have mentioned is that that sort of libertarian streak. Sherveen, I think you mentioned is that like games has it has an auteur kind of culture to it and emphasizes the sole practitioner or small teams who are making things. I'm wondering like how you conversations that you've had that anybody's had around kind of like countering that sort of notion about you're not the petty bourgeoisie, like you should recognize that you're working alongside other people. And yeah, I'm just curious kind of what those conversations have been like for you.
Yeah, I think this is a conversation we've had with union membership as well, because I think there is a tendency in games to go, well, the solution is really like independent studios will save us, or like everyone is trying to, work really hard so that they can eventually form their own studio and be like an indie darling. And I'm not someone. I think we have more like militant members of UVW. I'm someone who's like, to each their own. But I think the way that we talk about it is there needs to be a cultural shift in where the value is actually coming from, right? And in a lot of these cases, the value of these games, especially when you look at these large AAA games, right? It's coming from thousands and thousands of hours of labor from thousands of individual workers, and this is true just to a smaller scale at indie studios and smaller studios, and even developers that often will like label themselves as solo devs, right? A lot of that value is still coming from labor that someone has put in, whether it's on that team itself or through asset packs or pre-existing infrastructure. So I think there's still a very long conversation that needs to be had about how we perceive where the value is in games. Another thing we've been very encouraging of as a union is worker co-ops. I think they're also a really good parallel structure that helps keep worker power like in check as well. I don't know if in check that sounds negative. Worker power like at the forefront rather. And so that's the thing we also encourage. We have like a co-op subcommittee that's been very particular about our own definition of what a co-op is. I think there are co-ops that get very close, but they end up being like owned by still like a boss and things like that. And those are scenarios we like to avoid. And so like those sorts of structures are interesting, and also kind of talking one-on-one with individual workers about where the value that you're contributing is coming from, and whether you're being valued correctly by your employers and your bosses.
Yeah, and Goran, you mentioned this as well, that like that sort of libertarian streak among computer scientists, programmers. How did you kind of make the argument when you were starting to unionize your coworkers?
Yeah, I'll say what doesn't work is to like start quoting, Karl Marx to people and tell them about like the long internationals.
What if they're like really good, inspiring quotes?
It sometimes works,
Hang up a bunch
but
of
rarely does
inspirational
it.
posters.
Rarely is that the only thing. I think what's key is like when you're talking to someone who might be skeptical, is like being very inquisitive and like not forgetting that like you have a point of view that you're trying to convince them of, but also like listening more than you talk, which is definitely like for passionate people in the labor movement, a very hard thing to do, myself included. But like just start asking questions, right? Like if they're like, oh, I don't really know about this union thing, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, what are you like concerned will happen, right? And like rarely will someone say, well, I love negotiating when I get to take vacation, or like, I love like, making the case that I shouldn't be fired or whatever. Like the things that people love about what they're doing is like the actual doing of the work. And like the union's not in the way of that. It's not like stopping you from being creative. It's sort of freeing you to do that by taking care of all the like other stuff around the workplace. And then even like asking them like, hey, like, what's the worst day you've had in the office? Like, what's the worst day you've had on your job? Like, what happened? Blah, blah, blah. And like connecting, like, here's how like having a union there might have made things better. And like everyone has had a bad day. Everyone has had like someone they've fired, or like they got a bad rating and they didn't get like a raise this year or something like that. And you can say like, hey, like, here's different ways that we can address this, and like be clear that like the things we win are the things we are willing to fight for. So like you're not promising the world, but like here are some examples of ways that you can improve your workplace through this. And we had some people who like still think we're stealing money from them with dues, but like for the most part it works, and people get on board, right? Like everyone wants to make their daily life better, even if like they don't agree with you on like 90% of other like political opinions.
Yeah, being a part of a union that has a business school in it has I've learned that there are some people who really hate having a contract that gives them all of these great rights, and they will email you about it. Something you mentioned, Goran, and I wanted to ask JD and Laura about this is the people associate unions with just getting pay raises and things like that. But I'm wondering if in either of your experiences about those sort of other terms, Goran mentioned about different rights beyond protections that are beyond just a pay raise, about job protection itself, and if that was something in either of your experiences that you've been fighting for.
Yeah, I can talk to that a little bit. The grievance is a very powerful tool, and for
would
those,
you define that?
yeah.
For
So
us?
for those who don't know, basically, it's a structure by which like you can lodge an official complaint, right? That could potentially go to arbitration or any other sort of. It's basically the you messed up guy, right? And it means more when it comes from the voice of a collective action unit than it does from a single individual person. And so ultimately the ability, the thing that I found when I joined and started kind of working through the faculty union was that we were kind of underutilizing that particular tool, not only just for the purpose of changing things, because it's not necessarily the case that every grievance that gets filed is going to result in anything. But we've also, by virtue of the grievance process, had people rehired, right? We've had pay raises, and that's not what we're talking about per se, but we've had very tangible benefits by virtue of this lever that people didn't realize was a lever that they could have in the presence of the union structure, and so. Yeah, I think it's interesting because a lot of the discourse, I come from a very different perspective. The union was already there. The union has been there for 40 years or whatever, and I'm sort of seeing it to a certain extent, the degradation of faith in the union as a tool for actual fundamental change. And I think it's because people don't realize that a lot of the kind of day-to-day work of what a union does is stuff that you don't see, like the filing of a grievance in support of a faculty member that got unceremoniously released from their contract and nobody knows why, right? And so I think there's a lot of tools that by virtue of being a union has, and not even if you're going to use it, the perceived threat of the ability to do so, right? And that's obviously most obvious in the context of strikes or strike action. And so I think that it's a lot of the discourse around it starts from that perspective of oh, this is going to improve your immediate life. There's going to be a pay raise. There's going to be X, Y, or Z. We're going to fight for all of these things, and part of that is true. But I think also kind of the drudgery of it, day to day, is the levers that become available to the people with the the executive board and the union writ large, in officially to sort of try to mitigate issues. I don't know, Laura, if you want to talk to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at its core, a union, if anything, should be liberatory as opposed to, something else that you're introducing into the workplace. There's a lot of, the false narrative out there that the union could get in the way of this, the union could get in the way of that. And obviously it is true that there's a lot of mundanity that goes to union work, that goes into organizing. It's the stuff that people don't necessarily think about when they think about the fun, big bursts of action, but they're very important, and they're very important because of the way they facilitate the liberation of the worker. And I think that the biggest way that comes in for us, I remember I had a conversation early on with one of our representatives who was providing advice, and I just kind of expressed this thought do we really need to be doing this? People service, isn't it kind of supposed to be when you're working in the hobby space, especially where a lot of people are there because they're interested in the hobby, they're doing the work because they are having fun with it, but we're all here because of our interest in this, or we're all here in transit to somewhere else. Isn't that, do we really need, would a union be important? Would a union be worth the work? Would he really worth the work? This rep made the case that in the 1940s and 50s, as the automobile industry was unionizing, that was not a respected job. That was not a job that was taken seriously as something that you could build a career out of, or find to, bring into your life in a way that freed you up to do other things that, in some ways liberated you. That was a job that people worked for maybe a couple years and then moved on to something else. It was transitory as well. And so I think that allowing ourselves to reimagine what this job could mean, and allow ourselves to reimagine it maybe on our terms. One of our big early wins was winning just cause for termination, and also winning a probationary. This was in the bargaining process. I guess it wasn't signed off until the end, but that was a really big first concession for us, and something that really emboldened us, to feel we're safe doing this. Whatever this job means to me, wherever I'm going, I'm not going to be arbitrarily fired. I don't have to be afraid. It's not really the thing that the union came to protect us from was precarity. And I prefer, the drudgery of maybe filing a grievance, or I'm a steward, going to stewarding a meeting between a manager or a boss and a worker. I prefer that to precarity. The world, would prefer us to be in precarious positions because they're easy to exploit, they're easy to take advantage of, despite that fact, despite the fact that that's something that systems seem to encourage us to be, a place that it encourages some of us to go toward, a divided group of people who are kind of afraid, people who feel like they don't necessarily have a common interest, or in a lot of cases, people who feel like not involved in the other people's experience of the union or of labor. Those are the people who are the easiest to take advantage of. And so in the union, I got way more invested in the lives of my coworkers at the other stores. I had never even met most of them before, and I got to know a lot of them very, very well. I got more invested in the lives of my immediate coworkers and their values and what was going on in their lives and what was difficult. What mattered to them. The conversations early on, a lot of the time, were about what matters to you, what's a priority for you. Obviously, a lot of it is the wage in an economy where, again, precarity most often manifests in the increasing cost of everything, and the stagnation of wages, except for maybe a couple people who benefit. And I think that just being able to lean on each other, being able to, care and be invested in other people's experiences, not, feel both emboldened me really to care about my own thoughts, and really made me feel like I trusted myself more to speak up about my workplace demands. If heaven forbid, if I were, not in a union and I had a complaint and I wanted to raise it to my boss, I would be petrified. I'm scared of that kind of thing. Obviously there's retaliation, but there's a lot of other things as well. Just the intimidation factor.
I was going to say to that point, again, to go back to the idea of the grievance, right? Not every complaint that anyone ever has is going to go to the level of a grievance, but the idea that a grievance could be done, might and does embolden people to feel as though they can have those conversations with their bosses or with the people that are more immediately in control of the purse strings, right? It's well, if you're not going to listen to me talking to you, I'm going to take this to JD, who's going to really make your life miserable for a couple of months, right? And
Absolutely.
So there's, again, it's the existence of the interlocking systems in and of themselves is a bit of a benefit because it eliminates precarity. I think that's a great way to describe it. And again, we're not filing a grievance every 15 minutes, right? But the threat of being able to do so.
They were worried about that though.
Yeah, they are. Exactly. They're terrified of that fact, right? And again, there's a lot more of a social game to it, which is interesting, I guess, from a different perspective. But again, all of these systems exist not only for their immediate tangible benefit, which does in fact come to pass, but also because the presence or the perspective or the demonstration of a unified group of people scares those who don't want us to be a unified group of people, right? And by virtue of having that perception, it emboldens individuals to feel like they have more control.
And that those individuals, that it's not just me and a sea of other people and as members of a union, but I think that really in this case, the I in the union, the me with opinions, the me with thoughts and preferences, that could be a manifestation of the greater we, ideally. And I think through, maybe some drudgery and some liberation and some hard work, it can be.
Yeah, speaking. So you mentioned that I'd rather do this drudgery, than face these other things, Laura. For the other folks, I'm wondering, about how you make time for this. So that's the big problem, right? Is that well, we didn't need the back thing anyway. Yeah.
It's gone.
Yeah.
Y'all know why we're here.
We're now in the second half when
This is where things get
this
real.
is the real talk.
Scene change.
The after dark.
The after dark. What was I saying? Yeah, the making time, because that's the the advantage that is that everybody you are precarious. You don't have a lot of time. You don't have a lot of money, and so it often feels like like I've got to, and now I've also got to attend these meetings, and stuff like that. And it's hard to kind of carve out that space. And so I was just curious, kind of different ways that you've being involved in it, you have made that choice, like you are making that choice. But kind of like how you arrived at that, and that finding the time for this sort of work.
I mean, it's tough. It's on management side, they have lawyers whose full-time job is this, right? And you sort of have to, thankfully there's if you're working with an existing union, they have staff on board whose full-time job it is to help you, but obviously they can't have conversations with all of your members and it wouldn't really be as effective anyway. So you do make some sacrifices, right? We had standing organizing meetings once a week, just one regular one once a week, many other meetings that crop up, but we're okay, I'm not going to be doing anything on Wednesday nights for the next 5 years or whatever. And that's what it is, right? And then you find time, when you're talking to coworkers, you're talking to them during work. So you rearrange your schedule a little bit. You plan out your week a little bit more. You sort of are okay, maybe I won't have a stellar rating for my job for this year or things like that. If you have that kind of performance review stuff. And you do make sacrifices in order to make it work, but it's not impossible. There are people on our organizing committee who had little kids, had more than one during the course of our organizing, and found the time to come to the meetings and found the time to talk with their contacts and things like that. And it does take a little bit of a Tetris scheduling to do. And then sometimes you're not oh yeah, I'm definitely paying attention to the Zoom call while also filling out a spreadsheet of the latest action that you guys are doing. But you make it work. But it is an effort. There's that Jane McAlevey book, McAlevey book, No Shortcuts, and there aren't shortcuts. It takes time. I started our thing end of 2018, and we got a contract at the end of not last year, the year before. So from nothing to contract, that's a decent chunk of change of time. But I was 100% worth it. But it won't happen overnight.
My League of Legends rank fell. That was tough for me, not gonna lie. But jokes aside, I think when it is something that you realize that it matters, and then it's okay, I'm going to do this because it matters. And of course, there's labor involved, and there's work and what have you. But I find that more of a benefit than a loss now that I think about it, because I play a lot less League now.
I think another thing is, we talk a lot about scaling the asks, right? Everyone is at a different stage of their union organizing journey. People, some people are actively anti-union, some people are neutral, some people are positive, but they feel like they don't have time. And I think a thing that I ask folks a lot is okay, you don't have time. Do you have an hour this week to talk about just one-on-one? Talk something about organizing or your concerns or something like that. If you don't have an hour, do you have 30 minutes? And work to get to where people are. Like, meet people where they are and then figure out how to get them, like, elevated into more organizing conversations. I think that's, like, the approach I take a lot when I'm talking about it. Like, for example, I know for a fact at UVW, we have a few folks on our comms department, right? We do a lot of volunteer graphics and comms, and that's a lot to ask sometimes, right? Because these are typically folks that are getting paid for their work. So because of that, we have some folks who are, like, you know, doing weekly meetings. We also have folks who have literally told me, like, I am free this week of April, and, like, you know, the conversation I have is like, you can trust me to follow up with you. If you have that, like, 1 hour free, I will make sure that we have that conversation and that we put that hour to use, right? And I think that's a good way to make people feel like the time that they are investing is relevant to, like, a lot of our organizing conversations as well.
And Nathan, I'm curious for you. You know, it's you're making the case before about why these issues are worth covering in games, but you also must care about it to some that, like, this is something you're having to make the case to your readers, right? Like that, and that if there was no interest, I guess it would be a tough sell. But, like, presumably there's some interest. But I'm curious, yeah, kind of what that, in some ways, your coverage of it creates interest, like, but yeah, kind of the pressures on you being that you know, you have readers that you're trying to attract to your site and stuff like that as well.
Yeah. Well, again, I think part of it goes back to just the simple matter of wanting things to be better for people. I think that's pretty relatable. I think that any decent human being would look at a, like, unfair circumstance when games are being made or what have you and be like, yeah, that seems wrong. But also beyond that, you know, people who are happy make better stuff. People who are overworked, tired, burnt out tend to make worse things. And so it's a pretty simple case to make to readers. Like, hey, you like video games, you want them to be good, so you probably also want the people who are making them to be happy and healthy and capable and not just, you know, like, tired as hell all the time. Or, like, because, you know, the other thing that happens a lot at studios where things are unfair or where there's a lot of crunch is people just leave. And then also now, again, with all the layoffs affecting the industry, there's tons of brain drain. And so you have all these talented people and also these really talented teams being broken up. And, like, a lot of teams, you know, don't make their best game until they've made 3 or 4 or 5 or, you know, God knows how many, because they get to know each other and then they figure out how to, like, work creatively together better than they did before. And so if those teams are being smothered in the crib, then, like, you never get those games. You never get to see anybody's, like, magnum opus or their masterpiece. And so it's just a lot of that. It's, you know, because this, especially with, like, there have always been layoffs in the industry, but not to the degree that there are now. And you can just see in the quality of, like, not in the quality of games that come out, because there's still some really good games getting made, but, like, a lot of studios that used to make really incredible games either are shells of their former selves or they don't exist anymore. Like, I mean, you know, Monolith got closed down recently. That's the studio that made Shadow of Mordor, Fear, No One Lives Forever, all these classic games. It had, like, 30 years of history, and then it was just snuffed out in an instant. And, like, that to me is untenable. Like, there needs to be a mechanism by which workers can push back, because otherwise you're not just losing the potential for games of the future, but also history, legacy, institutional memory, all of this really important stuff that undergirds the whole industry. And so I think that, again, an easy way to pitch it is, like, without worker action, without union organizing, like, the industry as you know it, this thing that you cherish, is probably not going to survive, at least not in the way that it currently exists.
Yeah, I think that's something that I see on social media a lot from kind of more, like, liberal coded people is like an exasperation that this is happening because it's, like, bad business. It's like what, like, all of this institutional knowledge, because, like, that this you're just making it, you know, it would be so much better if you just paid these people a living wage.
Right.
And
well,
like,
especially because, like, so often what companies will do too is they'll lay a bunch of people off and then realize that they need to actually fill some of those positions. So they'll hire new people, and especially for games, because there's a lot of, again, institutional knowledge. It takes months to train people up, or sometimes they'll lay someone off and they'll be like, wait, that person knew, like all of this stuff that no one else on this team knows. We can't keep making this part of the game without them or without training somebody into there. And so it's just like a giant mess.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's often bad business, but it's always about, it's typical go up bullshit. It's okay, well, this will make our quarterly profits look better this time. So, let's slash 100 jobs or hundreds of jobs, or in Microsoft's case, thousands of jobs.
And it's like a symptom of games doing well, right? Because as businesses continue to make the line go up, they continue to make more money, it becomes harder and harder for them to meet their like quarterly targets by working hard. Like at a certain point, it gets to where the only way a manager can actually hit those targets is by reducing costs. And costs, the main cost that you're going to have as a studio is your labor costs. So that's why I think we're at the place that we are, is that, we've hit a point where it's just too hard for them to keep making bigger and bigger and bigger games. So the workers are the ones that are suffering for it.
Yeah. I mean, that also like destroys potential for the future as well. Because when you see these rounds of layoffs, there's also like, like little footnotes of, oh yeah, we canceled like this in development project, this new series, that new, or like that new game. Or like a game not in a pre-existing series. So you have like all these new ideas getting snuffed out. And again, that leads to a less interesting and vibrant games industry. People complain all the time, oh yeah, everything is just a sequel now, or it's a spin-off or whatever. And like, that's part of why, because everyone's cost cutting. They're like, well, this new thing is a risk, so let's get rid of that and just keep going with like our proven money makers and then cost cut further to make even more money. And again, that is like that's a death spiral in a lot of ways. That's a good way to eventually just not have anything.
Yeah, I often feel the cinema envy that games should have is the union structure of Hollywood. That the movie industry in the 20s and 30s had this same problem, right? Where all of these all the craft jobs were extremely precarious and so on and so forth, and that unionization sort of saved that whole industry because you could be a union carpenter or something, a set dresser, all these jobs, even if you weren't working on the one movie, like because you had all these job protections, and that not having that in games is like the so obvious. Also very project based. Has all these kind of structural similarities.
Yeah. Well, also another thing that I think really stands out about games is that games are very multidisciplinary, and they're also, especially like big studios, like it is teamwork on a level that is kind of insane. Like every game that gets made, every AAA game especially, is like a fucking miracle, honestly, given the sheer number of people who had to work together to make a thing that is relatively polished, that doesn't break constantly. And like that's a great seed bed for unionizing, because it's like, oh yeah, you all already have proven that you can work together at a scale that most people are not capable of. So like, okay, now turn that inward and help yourselves in addition to making something cool for other people.
Yeah, and like if you look at SAG-AFTRA or you look at a lot of other examples, United Auto Workers, United Farm Workers, a lot of the problems that are needing to be solved in the games industry are solvable problems, right? And it's really the few people at top, the like executive class, that have a vested interest in convincing everyone that these are like unique and nuanced problems that are very specific to games. But a lot of what's been going on, like if you look at the Code CWA campaign, it's the same strategies that were happening 100 years ago, right? You're going into a studio, you're talking to your coworkers, just like one-on-one, listening to their problems, and building those relationships, right? We talk about like what is the benefit of a union. There is like the protections, there's the contract negotiation, but it's also being able to know that, hey, your coworker in the cubicle next to you, if something happens to you, if you get laid off, that they are going to fight for you, right? And that is such a, like, who here would feel more safe at their job if they knew that their coworkers are like going to go to bat for them, right? Yeah, we get some hands.
No, one of the things that has stood out in like pretty much every interview I've done with workers at studios that are unionizing is they talk about that part. They say that in addition to everything else that they were able to either like bring to the table in a contract that they're bargaining for or in a contract that they won, the most rewarding part of all of it is just getting to know all your coworkers, because a lot of like for example Blizzard, it's fairly siloed in terms of both the games they're working on and also like different departments on those games, and so some of those people never talk. And it's like, oh yeah, now I know this person in QA that I normally never interfaced with, and like we're friends, and we have all these common interests, and they become a much tighter unit, which again I think probably leads to better games in the long run, in addition to people taking care of each other, and as you're saying, going to bat for each other if push comes to shove.
Yeah, I think that's something just the fact that unionizing allows people, I think, really to take their work more seriously, take the people they work alongside more seriously, is like the ultimate cure to dissatisfaction, disaffection, and also alienation. Like, I think we also have experienced, like, I get to know my coworkers, and I think that this kind of, you hear a lot of the same, the kind of as you were saying, Sherveen, that these problems are unique, that these problems are like, we have our own very specific things that would make this kind of a bad fit. That a union couldn't work in this micro industry or whatever. That's like we were saying before with auto workers, with SAG-AFTRA. These were industries that didn't have unions, and you would not have thought that they could have unions necessarily if you're from a time or from a place that they don't have unions in. And you really have to make that possible. You have to say it, you have to proclaim it loudly before the story becomes common knowledge. I think like a micro example of this to me was like with news coverage in our case. I would tell, my aunts and uncles or whatever at family gatherings, like, oh yeah, we're doing this unit thing, it's pretty cool. Be like, don't you just work at like a cafe or whatever? And I'd be like, check this Jacobin article out, and I could just be like, so it's like a legit, like this is a real thing that people are talking about, and then we start to have more faith in ourselves, we start to have more faith in our work. I don't feel like I'm just like, just somebody off the street. I feel like somebody who has something to contribute and something to say about the world. I feel like I could take my job more seriously. I feel like I can be more proud of who I am and what I have to contribute. And the fact that these things fulfill each other, that they make manifest each other, it's worth that one meeting a week. It's worth that, the fact that in the long run, the trade-off is being able to take my work much more seriously. I think that's more than an evening's worth.
Laura, let me ask you. So something Nathan brought up earlier about making the case to players, about like happier people make games. One of the things that I was really struck about your contract campaign was that you had a customer committee,
yes,
like
yes.
a solidarity committee of customers who supported the strike. And
I think the coolest thing, and we had some people who were familiar with the story, so I appreciate you for being part of the solidarity committee in a way. We had the tabletop solidarity committee throughout the entire process who was supporting us in that fight. And I feel like that to me is the coolest, weirdest, wildest thing. I also got to get really close to community members, and a lot of the folks who were, working after school. I don't work at after school. I don't even work at a store that does the after school. I got to meet kids' parents. And meet people who were interested in games and passionate about games as like a thing that their kid was learning through, or TTRP, tabletop RPGs, whatever, what have you, as an avenue for education and instruction, which is just super weird and bizarre. And like I think that to me, that was something that sort of began to be true as we moved on and as we were telling our customer base about what was going on. The first union action that we ever took was like a proclamation to the store. We read a letter. We tried to make it happen at a time where our boss would be in the store, and he is never, so we had to do it and film it and send it to him. But we got like people cheering and clapping and asking us questions and wanting to hear more, and like being able to do that, interrupt people's game of Carcassonne or whatever, and say, hey, this cool thing is happening. The vast majority of the time, if you speak with an amount of confidence, if you speak with an amount of care, also these community members have a confidence and care in the things that they play and the things that they enjoy. Like, it only makes things better, especially because these are incredibly communal hobbies. These are incredibly communal experiences. Being able to meet people who play a game, we don't sell war games or anything like that, like Warhammer. Being able to meet people who are passionate about things like that, being able to meet people who are passionate about games or trading card games or whatever that I don't play or I don't really have no connection to, I think really enriched my experience of being and working alongside those people and getting to serve those people. I think the coolest example of that to me was and also, there's the sacrifice of oh, I'm going to this meeting, or I'm going to that meeting. Something that I found really cool about where you're getting to see the sacrifice pay off is going to meetings with the Solidarity Committee, talking to community members, doing this thing that makes my my heart race and my blood my blood pump and just get super activated. My blood pressure spike. Was having those confrontational moments, and then I got to, we got to have a live stream with with Spice 8 Rec, who's a really cool Magic the Gathering creator, and also very left aligned, which was awesome for us. We got to do a live stream with them. I got to say, hey, we all are to do art and are queer and are making interesting things and are interested in games. And, there's a huge zine culture too with tabletop RPGs and games and everything. And I got to be hey, so what if we started this culture fair, this zine fair, and we got to do that. And I would never have been able to do that without having made the sacrifice of, doing something that was uncomfortable.
Yeah, and Goran, I'm curious about with the Times Tech Guild when you were on strike. I remember how that was communicated to reader or players of the Times games. Were those conversations that you were having as well about how to get the public kind of on your side in those negotiations?
Yeah, with a brand like the Times, it's a little trickier because people have a lot of strong opinions about it from all sorts of ways. So we had people, cheering us on because they wanted the paper to fail because we were too far left or too far right, or many mixed messages on social media. But we did try. I do think that community component is important. You see it a lot in teachers strikes and things like that, where one of the things they do is make sure the parents are on board, right? So that's one thing that bosses can use against them, and we wanted to reach out to people and say hey, this is happening, the site's not going to go down, but please don't use it, blah, blah, blah. And having a popular games team really helped us because we could say please break your Wordle streak while we're on strike. And it was really nice because someone created a non-Times version of some of our games, and then we have a bunch of people who write software in our union. So they created a hub site where people could add new games of play these while the Times tech workers are on strike, and people would post their scores from that. And getting people involved in different ways. I think the digital aspect of it is still something that needs some work and needs some thinking through. A digital picket line, what is that? How does that work? It's I think we had some ideas, some more successful than others, but would love to know more, especially for the games industry, which can be very remote heavy, at least different departments all over the country. But getting people excited and thinking that it's fun, it's very easy to just make public statements about here's how they're not treating us well, blah blah blah. But you also want some statements of here's the things we're trying to do, and here's why it's fun, and why it's fun to get together, and why it's fun to be a community and support each other. You can't you can't get people on your side by being hey, come be depressed with us, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't help.
I'm taking notes.
Yeah. So we tried to, especially during the strike, tried to keep all of our messaging really positive so that people would support us. And we got we got people donating to our strike fund. We got a bunch of supportive messages, more than the negative ones, so I'll take it. And it was fun to see people come out and support us digitally and physically.
I think that, as a brief aside, that exactly is the same thing that the worker experiences in unionizing of like I get to be involved in this, I get to make a choice or like be excited about this is the same thing that I feel like we saw with our community members. They were like, oh, I can maybe be involved in this. I can know the names of people who work here, know the names of managers, know the names of the bosses. Like I can have an amount of involvement in a way. And like we got to see like also people on the picket line or when we would do walkouts or any amount of action. Like I got to see like our customers laugh and joke with each other and talk about things that they had a common interest in. So to see the labor movement manifest in your life in a way that you might not have otherwise expected or thought wasn't possible or thought wasn't likely, you know, like auto in the 1940s, you know, coming back to that, it's just like, whoa, I can be involved in that. It's just it's exciting. It really is more exciting, I think, than anything else. And then obviously the drudgery is you know, the price we pay for the excitement.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think what's interesting about, again, coming from a slightly different perspective where it's like this is not a new union, right? It's the dissolution of the social dynamic, I think, actually is the biggest problem to a certain extent. It's like that's the hardest thing to keep going and maybe the most important thing to keep going. And so like part of what we do in a faculty union is not only, right, like, you know, come get depressed with us, right? But to a certain extent, it's also like, okay, you know, what events can we do to highlight the work of our fellow faculty, right? If the institution's not going to do it, how can we do it, sort of stuff, right? And I think that it's just important, sort of, and in the long arm of labor organizing, as important as it is to remember that fundamentally it is about like people that care about the same thing coming together to try to make that thing better. Because when you lose that, or when we lose sight of that, is when I think things start to kind of crumble a little bit, not to be depressing.
Yeah, Nathan.
I was just going to say also, you know, you were talking about how rewarding it was to see people like, you know, getting involved with like your own organizing efforts and all of that. And I think that another thing to keep in mind just about like organizing in general, whether you're talking about unions or like in our case, a worker-owned structure, is just that also it gives you a degree, like it just feels good to have a degree of like power and control in that element or in that area of your life. You know, I think that right now it's obviously a very scary time in this country, and you know, gaining a measure of influence anywhere feels good because I think we all kind of feel helpless. And so if you band together and you know, again, talk to your coworkers, talk to people in your community, and make all of that happen, it's also just like you feel a sense of, oh, like I can do something somewhere. I can help. I can, you know, be the change I want to see. All of that.
Yeah, I think this might be in No Shortcuts or similar book, but a quote that I always is that one of the most radicalizing things that can happen to someone is experiencing solidarity. That just like this, like, oh wow, there's this community, like, and that like, what else have I been missing out on? So sort of this, like all these things that happen. As we're sort of wrapping up, I want to ask a ILC classic question at these panels. So this is for everybody to answer. Is in a society organized on other principles, what sort of games? What would games look like in a society organized on other principles? How might they be different than the games industry of today?
It's really interesting.
They'd be good.
Yeah. We'd finally make the first good video game.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, again, they would probably, for one, you know, the way that a lot of video game productions break down is just like, it's, you know, a matter of like either they overscope or they just like, they don't schedule well. And so then like you hit basically like, you know, they need to like hit a milestone or something like that. And then that's where crunch comes in. It's like, okay, well, you know, this isn't going to be ready unless we all work ourselves to the bone, which is just mismanagement. Like a lot of video game productions break down because management does a poor job of either planning things out or stating expectations. And so I think that under other structures, there would be less of that, in part because it would just be a simple matter of, okay, well, you have the time and space you need to make this thing as you actually see fit and not under these like terrible conditions or impossible conditions even. So, I mean, I think that would be one of the main things to address. And I think that also it would just be a generally more democratic process probably instead of, you know, a handful of people at top saying, here's what we're going to do. Because like also within video game companies, some departments get more like power than others. For example, a lot of major studios, everyone looks down on QA, which really sucks because QA is incredibly important. Like, games don't work without a QA department. They're the ones who go through, who find all the places where it's broken, where it's buggy, where things aren't working as they should. And also an underrated element of QA that people don't really talk about is that a lot of people, like, when a game is early, the only people who are really getting a holistic vision of it, like, is it fun, is QA. Because most other departments are not actually, like, playing the builds that much, whereas QA is playing it all the time. So they see how it's coming together. So super important. And I think that those people would probably be given a more prominent seat at the table under a better structure. Because, I mean, I know, like, studios, like, for a while, I'm not sure if they're still doing this, but, like, for example, Gearbox, they make Borderlands. They had separate Christmas parties for QA and everyone else.
Whoa.
Yeah, QA got their own worst Christmas party.
Brutal.
It's brutal.
Yeah.
That's messed up.
Okay, so it's like in a society organized on different principles, what would be different? I think a thing I think a lot about is like the idea of exclusion, right? And the current status quo in the games industry means that it's a very specific, narrow type of game developer that gets to persist in these times, right? These are the workers that can continue to devote their time and energy into working in games after layoff, canceled game, right? And these tend to be like people who have some level of privilege or some level of ability to, whether it's finances or connections, to weather these economic uncertainties, right? And I think when you are in the industry talking to other developers, and I'm sure Nathan also has this as from like a journalistic lens, you become hyper aware of the vast amount of art that is not being developed because people are getting kicked out of the industry through layoffs, through harassment, through crunch. You know, all of these issues create a blander and less rich tapestry of what games can be. And so to me, that's what I am almost in mourning a lot of the time of that. And a lot of the work I do, I have an eye towards creating a vision of games where we do get to see that art, where we do get to see those things, because I think people deserve to see those things, right? Like as players and consumers as well.
Beyond the first good video game, I think a society organized around different principles, maybe from a more like high level economic perspective, would inspire a different system of game investment / persistence. I think that the way that it's set up right now is very boom and bust, and it seems like even when you boom now, like people are far. So like that's not working either.
Layoffs.
Yeah, you're busting either way, I guess. But like from that perspective, I think like it would be interesting to see a method of existence of games where like the purpose of their or the entirety of their existence is not dependent on a bottom line hitting a particular end game. And I think part of that's also kind of on, to throw it back to the average person or to the consumer. I think, you know, there is such a thing as voting with your wallet. Like these are things that within the structures that we have, I think do to a certain extent make a difference. And I would hope that in a circumstance or in a situation where people, you know, have more opportunity to engage with more work, right? They're not funneling their limited time and resources into the very few things that are able to capture the most of their attention. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic answers. I think to try and like look at it specifically through like a communal space, hobby, you know, kind of angle, I think we'd be more interconnected. I think we would spend more time with more real, you know, honest time with other people who are involved in our communities, other people who are maybe adjacent to our communities, but through happenstance and through, you know, the kind of isolationism that is prevalent in our culture, particularly in the 21st century, we don't have the occasion to interact with very much. I think and I believe and I hope also that it would make us care more about the things we already love, and find all the more resonance with the parts of our lives that already do bring us joy. I think that voice that comes from us, that makes us love something, that makes us care about something, that makes us care about people, isn't going to get dwindled or thrown aside. Like, I think focusing very specifically on the individual member of the community, individual in the community, or the individual member of the union. I hope that there would be a discovery of something beautiful coming from within. So I think, practically speaking, there'd be more events. There'd be more, zine and literature exchanges. I think more people would design like tabletop games. I think more people would feel allowed to go to events, to be involved in events, to make things, to hang out with people that aren't like them. And I think all of those things are a positive.
Yeah, I mean, there's a arcade that you can visit in Russia currently that dates back to the Soviet Union, where they made their own like sort of worker-focused arcade games. So basically like that. No, that does exist though. No, but I think you'd have, in my mind, you'd have two parallel things that would be different, both in terms of like logistics and content. I think like organizing society around the worker, where things like healthcare, things like retirement, things like housing, like are more communally taken care of, makes it easier to start like new businesses, to start new teams, to start new companies that it can be fine to sell things for profit, but like how many like studios could actually be like 50 smaller studios of working on many different games if they didn't have to think about, okay, well, I'm starting a company, like how do I get a good health insurance rate for my employees? How do I start an IRA for them? How do I start blah, 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 blah. Like if we could start taking care of that at a systematic level, that would be such a burden off of like the unsexy work of creativity. And I think the creations itself would start to be different as well. Like I think one of my favorite movies is As Good as It Gets, and there's like a big plot point in that movie about how restrictive HMOs are. They're like not really much of a thing anymore. They've sort of fallen out of favor. Like you showed someone that movie today, they'll be like, what the fuck is this? And like medical debt could be like that, right? Like there wouldn't be games, not that there are tons of games about medical debt, but like where things like that kind of precarity are themes, like they wouldn't happen. We'd come up with new things to talk about and sort of be able to kind of forget about some of these like previous problems in society. So I think the art would change. That wouldn't mean it was all like sunshines and rainbows, but it would be different.
Yeah, actually, to add to that, if you look at just the way games are, bought and sold right now, like look at the structure of something like Steam, which is the biggest PC gaming platform. It's basically a monopoly. It's all built around like genre. And so there are these very narrow categorizations of games. And after a while, that dictates what people choose to make as well, because they realize they have a higher chance of succeeding if they lean into a pre-existing genre. And having a platform so rigidly focused like that, because of capitalism, because you've got to buy and sell something, because otherwise if your game doesn't hit it big enough, then you won't be able to keep employing people, you will have to close down. All of that really limits what games can be. There was a period of time in like I would call it like the early 2010s, maybe late 2000s, where like the initial indie boom of kind of games that came alongside like Braid and Super Meat Boy and stuff like that, there was this big moment of possibility, and it felt like games could be anything. And I think that as Steam sort of became more and more of this commodity-based platform, that went away. And now like even, the big indie games still mostly adhere to like classic gaming genres. We're still like, most of the things we play could have come out in like 2000, at least in terms of the imagination of the mechanics and the things that are happening in them. And so I think that another structure, a different societal structure, would allow for just so much more creativity than what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, and I guarantee, like, I've had a lot of conversations with other developers who are like, here's this great groundbreaking idea. I will never do it because the financials will never work and it will never make sense, right? So, that's I would love to see more of those.
Yeah. Lastly, we would get Fallout New Vegas too.
Yeah, real.
Well, we've been talking for a little over an hour, so I want to give our speakers a break. Thanks so much for this conversation. It's really enlightening and lots of great. I've been writing down like way more stuff than we would have time to follow up on. Perfect.
Okay, so thanks again, everybody, for coming out. So at this point, in fact, anything that you've written down, any questions you guys might want to pose, rather than doing kind of a formal Q&A session, what the ILC likes to do is to shut off the mics. We've got another room rented, and we've got pizzas on the way, so anybody who was good enough to stick around, we've got free pizza and drinks coming. I think this raises a lot of interesting questions. One of the framing devices that we had in the description of the panel was this quote from a philosopher, Herbert Marcuse, who speculated that in a free society, life would be organized more around principles of play, in this sort of sense of like Johann Huizinga or whatnot, rather than around toil. And so I think like the idea of actually being able to relate to each other in a more playful manner, in a way that's more voluntary in that sense, is perhaps a society that could help. It's the kind of society that we could actually strive for in a more organized fashion. And that's hopefully what this conversation has led to today. So thanks again. We're gonna move out and
So we're gonna go to room. If you'd like to join us, go to room 233. It's where Playtest Thursdays are. If you come around here for that, you just come out of here and then take a right and you go down a long, creepy hallway, and it's all the way at the end. That's where we'll be. So we'll see you over there.
Thanks, Thank you.